Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here for Thursday, July 30th with your Benny's Bats section. The idea of this video is to go over all the pitchers that are on the mound today, try to figure out what their weaknesses are, and then figure out which bats on the other team profile to do well against that pitcher's weakness. We go through each pitcher one by one, talk about some of the bats that are going to be going up against them, and the guys who we think are in the best spots that you should be using for your daily fantasy rosters tonight. The first guy we're going to talk about is Aaron Harang. Harang's pitcher for the Phillies. Left-handed bats have hit 263 against them with 6 home runs in 45 innings pitched. Last year, left-handed bats hit 289 against them, so he has been a little bit better this year, but that's still the way to get at him. On that Atlanta team, there's not a lot of big bats that are left, but the one guy who does really stand out is Freddie Freeman. Freeman has a 385 WOBA with a 245 ISO number. Playing this game with a park bump over in Philly today, so I definitely think he's somebody who's in play. He does have home run power. He is in the middle of that order. He does have a lot of opportunities to drive in runs, so I think that he's going to be somebody that you should look at. Next guy we can talk about is Alfredo Simon. Left-handed bats have really hit him hard this year. 309 batting average, 10 home runs, and 64 innings worth of work. He's going up against Baltimore today, so that puts a couple guys squarely in play. The first guy we want to talk about is Chris Davis. Now, Davis has been hot lately. He has 5 home runs in his last 8 games. He's been hitting the ball pretty well, putting up some double-digit scores on DraftKings. Has even hit a couple double-digit scores on sites like Fantasy Aces and FanDuel, which is much harder to do. He only has a 347 WOBA, which is a little bit lower than we usually like to look for. But his ISO score is 268, meaning he does have a lot of home run power. And against a guy like Alfredo Simon, who's been giving up a lot of home runs, he's definitely somebody who I think we should look at today. Has a good hitter's park at home in Baltimore, so he has a lot of upside. The drawback is he's only available at the first base position now. He used to be a first and third base eligible player, which meant that you can fit him into your rosters a lot easier on a site like DraftKings. But on a site like FanDuel or Fantasy Aces, where he's only a first base eligible player or corner infield eligible player, it's a little bit tougher to fit him in there. His price has come up, so if you find him somewhere where he's still kind of cheap, I think he's a good play. But if you have to pay up for him today, I'm not sure if I love him that much. A couple other guys on that Baltimore team to discuss. You have Jimmy Paredes and Manny Machado, whose numbers are actually really good so far this year against right-handed pitching. But neither one of these guys has been hitting well lately. Both guys are in a little bit of a slump and aren't somebody who I think I would use, especially at the price that they're being asked for. One guy who is under the radar, though, that is hitting pretty well is Jonathan Shute. He's got a 456 WOBA with a 396 ISO number. Only about 60 at-bats so far this year, but those numbers are huge. He's been hitting the ball really well, has about 7 home runs already in limited action. So Shute is somebody who could be that sneaky cost saver. On some sites, his price has started to come up. He's actually more expensive than Paredes already on DraftKings. But I think over on Fantasy Aces, you can still get him for cheaper. And on FanDuel, I think he's still reasonably priced as well. So those would be the sites where I'd really look to use him a little more. Next guy we can talk about on the other side of that game is Miguel Gonzalez. He's only given up about a 240, 250 batting average to both sides of the plate, which isn't all that bad. But he has allowed 18 home runs already this year. So I think you got to look at some of those home run hitters on the Detroit team. You got a guy like J.D. Martinez, who has a 387 WOBA with a 279 ISO. A guy like Yoenis Cespedes has a 376 WOBA, 225 ISO. But in 5 of his last 9 games, he's been able to put up double-digit fantasy points over on DraftKings. So I think those are the 2 guys that I would really want to target on that Detroit team. You also have Ian Kinsler, who's been pretty hot lately. Usually, hitting on top of that order, so he should have a chance to get that extra at-bat being on the away team. He's also going to be able to get on base a couple times, and he's got those big boppers behind him that can bring him in. So those would be the guys who I would look to target over on that Detroit side. Next guy we can talk about is Marco Estrada. He's pitching at home in the Rogers Center up in Toronto. Goes up against Kansas City today. He hasn't given up a very high batting average to either side of the plate, but he has given up a lot of home runs. He's given up 11 already this season, gave up 29 last year and 19 the year before. So the problem Estrada has always had has been giving up the long ball. He seemed to have it under control earlier in the year, but lately it's starting to rear its head again. So I think you can look at some of those guys that have a chance to hit a home run on that Kansas City team. There's two guys that really stand out to me. The first one is Eric Hosmer. He's homered in 2 of his last 3 games already anyway. Has a 403 WOBA, which is pretty high, and a 205 ISO number. He's got double-digit DraftKings points in 4 of his last 5 games. So he's been hot. His price is still a little bit low, and I think he's somebody that you definitely want to consider today as a salary saver at first base. I mean, he's not a huge salary saver. It's not like you're getting him for $3,000 or anything like that. But he does open up some, some salary for you to spend elsewhere, and still gives you that same upside that you're looking for, especially with the huge park bump that he's getting, moving from Kauffman all the way over to the Rogers Center in Toronto. The other guy I think you can look at on that team is Mike Moustakas. He usually hits in the 2-hole for them. He's a lefty, so he's got the lefty-righty splits going on. He's got a 368 WOBA and a 158 ISO number. So he's somebody who has a little bit of power, has been hitting a little bit. He can even steal a base for you, score some runs up on top of that order. Third base eligible option, somewhere around the $4,000 range on most days. I think he's a solid play that you can use as well. You want to try to get exposure whenever there's a game up in the Rogers Center, especially a game like this that has a pretty high total on it. On the other side of that game, you got Danny Duffy going up against Toronto. Duffy has allowed right-handed bats to hit 263 against them this year with 7 home runs and 61 innings pitched. Now, this is what we all wait for. You want a left-handed pitcher going up against that right-handed dominant Toronto order up in the Rogers Center. Now, there are a couple things that I want to make sure I tell you guys. That lineup is a little bit weakened by the fact that Devin Travis and very likely Edwin Encarnacion are not going to play today. Both of those guys left the game 2 days ago a little bit early. And neither one of them played yesterday. Joey Batista also left that game early, but he did play yesterday, but I'm not sure if he's 100%. Now, with that being said, there's still a ton of bats that you want to look at on that Toronto team. You got Tulo in the Toronto uniform now, went 3 for 5 with a home run last night, and that was against right-handed pitching for the most part. So against the lefty, which is his preferred split, you got to think he's in play. He has a 420 WOBA this year with a 218 ISO number. Between his game in Toronto and his games, when he played on the Rockies. So he's definitely somebody that you want to consider. Josh Donaldson has been smashing left-handed pitching and smashing pitching up in Toronto all year. He's got a 434 WOBA, a 317 ISO number, probably one of the best options on the day. Definitely one of the guys who stands out for you. Definitely somebody who's going to be highly owned. Also very expensive on whatever site you're playing on. But again, the matchup's so good for him that even though he's expensive, he's still somebody that's worth paying up for if you can afford to. You got Russell Martin, who's going to be a popular catching option. 416 WOBA, 231 ISO. So his numbers are great against left-handed pitching. Another guy who hits very well at home in the Rogers Center. Should be somewhere in the middle of that order today, especially if they don't have guys like Encarnacion. You might find them in the 4-hole or maybe even in the 5-hole if they move Colabello up to the 4. Speaking of Colabello, he's another guy that's on this list. 396 WOBA, 241 ISO score. Has a lot of power, has been smashing left-handed pitching, has been having probably the best season of his career so far this year. So he's another guy that you have to look at. And finally, you got a guy like Danny Valencia, a good salary saver. Again, I don't think that he has the home run upside that people think he does when he's in a righty-lefty matchup. We spoke about this a couple days ago. But still, a 366 WOBA and a 149 ISO, those are pretty decent numbers, especially for a guy who's, a platoon player who is priced on most sites like a platoon player. He's about $1,000 cheaper than any starter at the position that you're going to be able to find. And whether you can get him at second base, third base, or outfield, depending on what site you're on, I think he's somebody that you want to consider to put in your rosters as a, salary saver with some upside. Definite good cash game play, and I think he's even worthy in GPPs if his price is low enough. Next guy we can talk about is Stephen Wright going up for Boston. Now, Boston pitching has been getting absolutely smashed. They've given up 28 runs in the last 3 days to the Chicago White Sox, and Wright is not one of the better pitchers that they have on that team. He's only allowed about a 260 batting average to both sides of the plate, and he's already given up 10 home runs and 52 innings worth of work. So I think that the White Sox are going to be able to get to him today. You got a guy like Jose Abreu, 365 WOBA, 195 ISO. He's one of the big bats that you got to look at. Adam Eaton on top of that order, 358 ISO, 358 WOBA, 187 ISO. So, he hit the home run yesterday. He does have a little bit of home run power. He has some sneaky power. Whether it's doubles or home runs in the gap, he's somebody that I think you can look at as well. Melky Cabrera has 10 or more DraftKings points in 6 of his last 7 games. So he's been absolutely on fire right now, hitting in the middle of that order, driving in some runs, scoring some runs, racking up a couple hits each game. So he's another guy that's in play that you can look at. And the last guy is Tyler Saladino. He's a shortstop, third base eligible over on DraftKings, second base or shortstop eligible on some of the other sites. He has double-digit DraftKings points in 3 of his last 5 games too. As long as he's hitting in the 2-hole and the guys in front and behind him are hitting the ball well, he's going to get a chance to get some fastballs, get some hits, get on base. And when he gets on base, he has been scoring runs. Again, his price is so cheap. Over on Aces, he was one of my top picks yesterday that we mentioned. He was $37.50, and he scored about 5 or 6 points over on Fantasy Aces. So he gave you great upside for the price that he was being laid out there at. Even on DraftKings, he had double-digit DraftKings points for around $3,000 yesterday. So he gave you more than 3 points per 1,000, and you really can't ask for much more out of a middle infield option that you're using. The next guy I want to talk about is Matt Shoemaker from the Los Angeles Angels. Left-handed bats are hitting .253 against him with 10 home runs, and right-handed bats are hitting .273 against him with 7 home runs in 46 innings. So the one guy who really, really stands out for me on that Houston team is Preston Tucker. Tucker's been absolutely smashing the ball against right-handed pitching in basically so far this season. He did have a home run again yesterday. He has a 404 WOBA with a 293 ISO number. So Tucker is definitely one of those guys that's in play. I'd much rather use him as a left-handed bat on Houston than go down to a guy like Valbuena. Valbuena does have home run upside, but if anything, he's mostly just a GPP play for me because he doesn't have a lot of safety. He's not a guy that's going to get you a couple hits. He's very feast or famine. He's either going to go 0 for 3 and do nothing, or he's going to go 1 for 4 with a home run or 2 for 4 with a home run and a double. And to me, that screams that he's a guy that's better used in a tournament than he is in a cash game. Let's see. We got Phil Hughes. Phil Hughes has been having a big problem with home runs this year. He's an extreme fly ball pitcher. It's been a problem with him over his entire career. Left-handed bats are hitting .271 with 12 homers. Right-handed bats are hitting .297 with 11 homers. So like I said, basically anybody on either side can take this guy yard. The only guy on Seattle right now that's healthy that I think you can look at is Nelson Cruz. He's got a 375 WOBA and a 228 ISO number. And remember, Cano got hurt and is probably out for this game. So he would be the other bat that I would have liked. He's been hitting very well since the All-Star break, since they moved him back to the cleanup spot. He's starting to hit with some power. He's been able to hit for average. And, it's really a big blow for that Seattle team that he's out right now. Got a helicopter flying over my house at the moment, so let me give you a minute here. All right, so the next guy we can look at is J.A. Happ. Right-handed bats are hitting .268 against him with 9 homers and 82 innings pitched. There's a couple guys that I think we can look at on that Twins team. Basically, right at the top of the order, you got Brian Dozier with a 383 WOBA and a 252 ISO number. He does have home run upside, which is something you don't see from many second basemen. He is pricey. He's either the most expensive or one of the top 3 most expensive options, I think, on every site today at the position. But again, you're not going to get a lot of guys that have that home run upside. He's in a decent matchup to get a home run today. And like I said, he's, 383 WOBA, 252 ISO number are numbers that you don't normally see from the second base position. So, if you can fit him in your roster, I think he's a good guy to pay up for. You also have his teammate, Aaron Hicks. Hicks has been hitting in the 2-hole for the Twins lately. 425 is his WOBA right now with a 185 ISO score. He's been absolutely phenomenal lately. I think he hit another home run yesterday. He had one again on Thursday or Friday. So he's hot right now. He's got some good numbers, and he's in a good matchup. So I think you can look at both of those guys, Dozier and Hicks. One guy who I want to tell everybody to kind of stay away from today is Miguel Sanu. Now, you guys know I really like this kid. I think he's got a lot of talent. I think he has a lot of upside. But so far, he's been putrid against left-handed bats. You would think as a right-handed bat that he would be able to hit them. But so far, that has not been the case at all. He's basically done all his damage so far this year against right-handed pitching. Kind of like a poor man's Justin Turner at this point. And until I see him start getting some hits off lefties and raise those numbers up right now, he's definitely somebody who I think I'm going to be staying away from, because I just don't see the upside in using a guy who, basically has been struggling against left-handed pitching. Next guy we can talk about is Chris Bassett, the Bassett Hound from Oakland. He's been decent. Left-handed bats have done better against him. Right-handed bats, have been okay. They're not bad, but they're not horrible. Uh, let's see. So the guys that I think you can look at, you got a guy like Jason Kipnis, who has a 433 WOBA with a 174 ISO number. Now, I would much rather use a guy like Dozier than a guy like Kipnis. Kipnis may get you a couple more hits. He may wind up with 2 or 3 hits. But so far this year, he really hasn't shown the pop that he has in the past. He's been getting a decent amount of doubles, hoping that those turn into home runs, but so far they haven't. And even though he is somebody who you want to target against right-handed pitching, I don't think he has huge upside today. A guy who we spoke about last week is Michael Brantley. He's got 373 WOBA with a 172 ISO number, but since the All-Star break, his numbers have been even better than that. Like I said, the first half of the year, he was a little bit banged up, hadn't been playing well, but still put up decent numbers. He seems to be swinging the bat very well now, and he seems to be feeling much better. So I think that he's definitely somebody that you can consider. Again, he has huge upside. When he's healthy, he's a top 20, 25 hitter in the league. And so far this year, he just hasn't been healthy, so he hasn't shown us what we usually expect to see out of him. The next guy we can talk about is Chris Russin. Russin's going up against St. Louis, gets a great park shift going from Colorado to St. Louis. So he's going from one of the best hitters' parks to one of the best pitchers' parks. But he's been really bad. Left-handed bats have hit 292 against him. Right-handed bats are hitting 303 against him with 7 homers and 48 innings pitched so far. There's 2 guys that kind of stand out on that St. Louis team. The safer cash game option to me is a guy like Matt Holliday. He's got a 377 WOBA with a 154 ISO score. So he's definitely somebody, if he's in the lineup, that you can always look at against left-handed pitching. The guy who really stands out to me, though, is Randall Gierchuk. He's been hitting in the 2-hole lately for them. 372 WOBA, 250 ISO number. I mean, this kid's got a lot of power. He's only 23, 24 years old. And I think he has a big, big upside in that St. Louis organization moving forward. Like I said, they've been moving him up to the 2-hole when they play against left-handed pitching. 372 WOBA, 250 ISO. Those are some pretty elite numbers. And depending on what site you're playing on, this guy's still really cheap. I know on like Fantasy Aces, you can get him for around $4,500, which I think is a great price. I think on sites like FanDuel and DraftKings, you can get him for pretty cheap as well. So he's a good salary-saving option that you can use today to help you basically fit in some of the big bets that you want to get into your lineup. Next guy we can talk about is Michael Pineda. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be on Pineda today, but I think that Texas team can get some runs against them. There's a 9-run total in that game. He is favored, so they're only expecting Texas to get about 3 or 4 runs. But I think that this game could turn into a little more of a shootout than Vegas expects. Pineda hasn't been that great this year. He's had some really good starts and some really bad starts, and his numbers overall show that he's a decent pitcher, but not somebody that you want to be worried about targeting against. Most of the guys who I don't want to target against have batting averages in the 220, 230 range, maybe even one side of the plate up to 240. Pineda's given up a 265 average to left-handed bats with 7 homers and 56 innings, and a 288 batting average to right-handed bats with 6 homers and 62 innings. So like I said, those are pretty good numbers. That's not a guy who's going to scare me away from using any bats against him, even as a Yankees fan. Some of the guys who I think are in play, you got Fielder, who's got a 405 WOBA with a 158 ISO. Now, he's been hitting the ball pretty well this year, but he hasn't had the home run power that we expected out of him, especially playing in a park like Texas, where you would think he'd have some more balls flying out of there. The guy who has been showing the power has been Mitch Moreland, 400 WOBA, 284 ISO. So those are some of the better numbers that you're going to see at any position for any splits matchup that we have today. Again, the problem with those 2 guys is you can only use one of them at first base, so the other one winds up falling by the wayside. But I definitely think Moreland is somebody you can look at today. You also have a guy like Sin-Shu Chu, who's starting to hit again. He's got a 364 WOBA, 209 ISO. I'm not going to be looking for another cycle out of him, but like I said, he has been hitting. Earlier in the year, he was absolutely putrid. So the fact that his numbers are where they are right now means that he has been turning it around lately. The other guy you can look at as second baseman is Rougned Odor. He has one of the highest WOBAs since the All-Star break. Right now, his overall WOBA is up to 353, and his ISO score is up to 210. So he has flashed a lot of power out of the second base position, which, again, like we mentioned with Dozier, is something that you usually don't see all that often. So when you do have a guy who has some power at second base, especially if he's a little bit of a salary saver, I mean, again, he's over $4,000 on DraftKings, but he's a big discount to a guy like Dozier on most sites. So he could be the sneakier, lower owned, lower cost play that you fit into your second base option there. Next guy we can talk about on the other side of that game is Giovanni Gallardo. Right-handed bats have actually hit for a higher average and more home runs against them, which means that a guy like Alex Rodriguez is in play. Rodriguez does really well in righty-righty matchups. 373 WOBA, 225 ISO. So, he's got power and he's been hitting consistently. Next guy you can look at, Mark Teixeira has great numbers against right-handers this year and loves hitting in that Texas ballpark. He's got a 399 WOBA with a 326 ISO. So he's one of the top options today for a home run with an ISO that big against a guy like Gallardo, who has been able to give up some home runs, been known to give him up a little bit in his career. Next guy you could look at too is Brett Gardner. I don't love Gardy because his price has come up a lot, but he is one of my favorite Yankees. He's got a 374 WOBA, 178 ISO. He's been absolutely great so far this year. But again, the problem I have with him is his price has come up, and I don't know if I really want to take a guy who's not a big home run hitter for the price that he's at, because the guys that are around him are big home run hitters. And, on some sites, he's as expensive, if not more expensive, than a guy like Nelson Cruz. And I'd much rather have the upside that Cruz gives you with the home runs. Let's see. The next guy we can talk about is Jimmy Nelson. Jimmy Nelson has really struggled with left-handed bats this year. He's given up a 302 average with 7 home runs and 48 innings pitched. Now, Nelson's been pretty good. He's got 3 games in a row where he's had over 20 DraftKings points, and his price today is only $7,800. So I think he might be a popular option to use. He is a high strikeout guy going up against the Cubs, who have one of the top strikeout rates in the league against right-handed pitching. And the other thing is that kind of surprised me. The Cubs' team batting average is in the bottom 4 in the league right now against right-handed pitching. I would have thought they would have been a little bit better than that. You think about the Cubs and all the big bats that they moved up and the guys that they have that can mash home runs. And yes, they can mash home runs, but they also strike out a lot and have a really low batting average. So this isn't the worst matchup for a pitcher. Like I said, he has struggled mightily with left-handers, 302 batting average and 7 home runs in 48 innings. So that means that you got to look at a guy like Kyle Schwarber if he's in the lineup. Schwarber has a 509 WOBA right now, 302 ISO against right-handed pitching. Left-handed bat should be towards the top of the order. I mean, those are just some sick numbers. So he's definitely somebody that's going to be in play. If the site that you're playing on hasn't priced him up like the stud that he's been playing like yet, definitely make sure you put him in your lineup. Even if you have to pay up for him a little bit, I still think he's going to be a pretty good option today. The other guy who stands out is Anthony Rizzo. Finally had a home run yesterday. Finally looks like he's starting to, be the Anthony Rizzo that we knew and loved, who had basically been struggling for a little bit over a month at this point. He still has a 379 WOBA with a 255 ISO score against right-handed pitching. So he's another guy that's definitely firmly in play here today. That pretty much rounds it out. There's only 11 games going on the slate tonight. That pretty much rounds it out for a lot of the batters that we wanted to talk about. You got a guy like Shelby Miller going up for Atlanta today in Philly, so he's getting a little bit of a park downgrade. Left-handed bats have been doing damage against him with like a 260 average, so maybe a guy like Ryan Howard could be somebody you looked at. Maybe even a guy like Cesar Hernandez again as a cheap option to get on base and steal. You got Chris Sale, we're not targeting anybody against him. Jake Arrieta, not targeting against him. Carlos Carrasco, I don't love him, and I won't be using him today. I'm interested to see Josh's take on him, but he's also not really a guy that I'm looking to target a lot of bats against. And the last guy is Scott Kazmir going up against the Angels. Kazmir's been pretty good, and the Angels are likely without Mike Trout. So I think that Kazmir's a guy that you can use on the mound, and he's definitely not a guy that I'm going to be targeting bats against. Again, the only, you want to target right-handed bats against a guy like Kazmir. The only right-handed bat that's in there that scares me if Trout's not playing is Pujols. And Pujols is a guy who does better in righty-righty matchups than he does in righty-lefty matchups. So, like I said, there's really nobody on that Angels team. So that, completes our rundown of the Benny's Bat section. Thank you guys for giving us a little bit of your time today to help you start your daily fantasy research. There is a small 2-game slate going on this afternoon that, we didn't talk about. We usually try to keep it to the late slate so people can watch the video throughout the day and, start their short list on it. As always, if you have any questions, you can come over to Roto Curve Forum. Myself, Josh, or Mike Rathburn are usually over there to answer them all for you. And as always, if you need to find us, you can find me at BennyR11 on Twitter, or follow us at RotoCurve. Danielle Kozlowski, our in-house meteorologist, you can follow her at Weather DFS. She'll be back around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock today to give you guys a weather update. And hopefully we can all make some money. There's some decent tournaments going on tonight. Thursday's not usually a huge night for MLB, but the money spends the same way either way if you win the tournament. So good luck tonight, guys, and as always, stay classy, DFS.